All right, so we've got a pretty fascinating deep dive ahead of us today, tackling this stack of Jeff Jarvis's work, What Would Google Do? It's all about how the internet is like reshaping business and media and you name it, really. It's kind of like a roadmap for figuring out this wild new world we're all living in, you know?
Yeah, and Jarvis is so good at connecting these like techie ideas to everything else in our lives. He's basically saying, hey, this isn't just some Silicon Valley thing. This is about how we understand the world now.
Exactly. And one of the biggest takeaways for me is this whole power shift thing, right? Like suddenly the customer isn't just always right. They're actually in the driver's seat.
It's a complete 180. Remember that whole Dell hell thing? A blogger just starts ranting about Dell's customer service, and it turns into this huge PR disaster for them.
Oh yeah, that was rough.
But it forced them to like completely change how they interacted with customers. They realized they couldn't just ignore these online conversations anymore.
So it was more than just some angry blogger. It was like a sign of something much bigger.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It showed that companies can't hide behind their marketing anymore. Transparency is the name of the game now.
So for someone trying to launch a new product or build a brand in this new world, what would you say is the key takeaway?
Well, if you're not embracing this power shift, you're fighting an uphill battle. The companies that are open to feedback, that actually collaborate with their customers, those are the ones that are going to win.
Makes sense. Jarvis also talks about this new architecture of business, right? It's all about links, not ownership.
It's like this, the internet is built on connections. It's about being part of this bigger network, not trying to control everything yourself.
So it's kind of like the difference between building a fortress and building a bustling city, right? You want to be the place where everyone wants to connect and interact.
Perfect analogy.
Yeah.
And Google Maps is a great example. They didn't try to keep it all to themselves. They opened it up, let anyone embed those maps on their websites.
And that created this whole explosion of new applications and ideas.
Exactly. By embracing that link mentality, they made Google Maps even more valuable. It became this essential platform that everyone relied on.
So how could someone apply this link thinking to their own work, even if they're not building a website or a tech platform? What would be a practical example?
Think about collaborations, partnerships,
Yeah.
even just how you share your ideas. Are you making yourself and your work easy to find? Are you building bridges to other people in your field?
So it's about being findable, accessible, and being part of the conversation.
Absolutely. If you're not searchable, you basically don't exist in the Google economy.
Right. It's like the internet has made being public
Hmm.
into this valuable asset. Speaking of which, Jarvis talks about About.com, that website owned by the New York Times.
Yeah, they basically built their entire business around being Google ready.
Hmm.
They structured their content super carefully to rank high in search results.
That's pretty impressive for a company with such a traditional media background.
It just goes to show that even the old guard can adapt to this new world.
For sure. Okay, another big idea from Jarvis is this whole mass market is dead thing.
That's where the long tail comes in, right? The internet lets us cater to these smaller, more specific audiences.
So instead of trying to be everything to everyone, you can really zero in on a specific audience.
Exactly. And even though those niche audiences might be small or owned together, they make up a massive market.
It's like that saying, a million is a small number in the internet age. And it's not just theory either. Look at eBay, a platform for millions of small sellers.
And they ended up outselling some of the biggest department stores. It shows you the power of the niche.
So for our listener who's maybe starting a business or launching a project, what's the takeaway here?
Don't try to be all things to all people. Find your tribe, the people who are truly passionate about what you offer.
I like that. Okay, so this is where things get really interesting. Jarvis argues that free can be a legitimate business model, which seems kind of crazy at first.
It does seem counterintuitive, but he makes a really strong case. In the traditional economy, scarcity drives value. But in the Google economy, abundance can be this powerful tool.
Okay, so how does that work in practice? How do you actually make money when you're giving things away for free?
Well, think back to that Google Maps example. They could have easily charged developers to use those APIs.
Right.
But by giving them away for free, they created this massive wave of innovation. All these developers building cool new apps using Google Maps.
Which made Google Maps even more essential.
Exactly. So even though they weren't directly charging for the APIs, they were creating tons of value.
It's like they built the foundation and then invited everyone to come build on top of it.
Exactly. And that's where the money started to come in. It's about finding those side door revenue opportunities, those unexpected ways to turn generosity into profit.
But that takes a lot of trust, right?
Yeah.
You have to believe that giving stuff away for free will lead to something bigger down the line.
Jarvis calls it investing in the network. It's about understanding that value can be created in ways that don't always fit into those traditional business models. And it leads into this other idea, the gift economy.
Oh, so what is the gift economy and how does it relate to this whole free thing?
The gift economy is all about voluntary contributions, collaboration, and the idea that giving can be its own reward. Think about open source software like Linux or Apache. These essential tools were built by volunteers, not big corporations.
And it's not just about being altruistic. There's a real business case for this collaborative open source approach.
Absolutely. When you tap into the collective intelligence of the crowd, you get better results, faster innovation, and the potential to build something truly groundbreaking. It's like crowdsourcing on steroids.
So how does a company actually move from a traditional model to this gift economy approach? It seems like a pretty big jump.
It does require a shift in mindset. Instead of seeing your customers as just consumers, you start to see them as partners, as collaborators.
Jarvis mentions Dell's IdeaStorm platform as an example of this.
Right? It's this online space where customers can submit ideas for new products and features. And the key is Dell actually listens to those ideas. They've actually implemented a bunch of them.
So it's not just a PR stunt. They're genuinely trying to tap into the wisdom of the crowd.
And that's what makes companies like Dell stand out. They understand that in the Google economy, their customers are their most valuable asset.
Okay, so we've got this power shift to the people, the rise of the niche, the power of free, and this idea of the gift economy. How does Jarvis tie all of this together?
He calls it the Google economy. It's an economy built on abundance, openness, and connection. It's about using the power of the internet to create value in new and sometimes unexpected ways.
And he keeps saying middlemen are doomed. Is he being a little dramatic, or is there something to that?
I think he's onto something. We've seen it happen with travel agents, record stores, even newspapers. The internet is cutting out the middleman in all sorts of industries.
And it's not just about technology replacing people, it's about a fundamental shift in how we connect with each other and how we get information and services.
Exactly. Think about Amazon. They've basically replaced the traditional bookstore or Netflix. They've totally changed how we watch movies and TV shows.
So what does this mean for the average person who's not running a tech company or trying to disrupt an industry?
I think the biggest takeaway is this. The Google economy is all about adaptability, flexibility, and being comfortable with change. It's this fluid, dynamic environment that rewards those who are willing to experiment and embrace new ideas.
It's like the old rules of job security, stability, predictability. They're all out the window.
Jarvis actually uses this metaphor of life as a beta. It's about embracing the idea that we're all constantly learning and evolving, and it's okay to make mistakes along the way.
That's actually kind of freeing, isn't it? Like you're not expected to have it all figured out. You're allowed to try things, fail, and learn from your mistakes.
And that's where honesty and transparency are so important. In the Google economy, hiding your mistakes is pretty much impossible. Information travels too fast.
So instead of trying to cover things up, it's better to just be upfront about it.
Jarvis argues that transparency can actually make you more credible.
So let's say you're running a business and you make a mistake. What's the best way to handle it in this new world of radical transparency?
Think about JetBlue. A few years ago, they had that huge meltdown where passengers were stuck on the tarmac for hours. It was a total PR nightmare.
Yeah, I remember that. It was everywhere.
But instead of trying to downplay it or make excuses, JetBlue's CEO came out and publicly apologized. He admitted their mistakes and promised to do better.
And people actually respected them more for it.
Exactly. It was a
Yeah.
perfect example of how to handle a crisis in the Google economy.
So it's not just about being ethical, it's actually a smart business strategy.
Transparency builds trust. And trust is everything in this new world.
But isn't there a downside to all of this? Like, doesn't this constant push for transparency and efficiency make everything feel kind of sterile?
It's a valid point. Jarvis talks about the risk of commodification. As we become more reliant on platforms like Google, there's a danger that everything starts to feel the same.
Right, like we're all just cogs in this giant impersonal machine.
It's definitely something to be aware of.
Hmm.
How do we embrace the good parts of the Google economy without losing our individuality and uniqueness?
That's a tough question, but it's one that we all need to be thinking about.
Yeah, it really does feel like a whole new era.
Right, like all the old rules are out the window, and this whole free thing is still kind of blowing my mind. Isn't there a risk that if you're not charging for stuff, it just becomes worthless?
That's a great question, and a lot of businesses are wrestling with that.
Yeah.
But Jarvis's point is that just because something is free doesn't mean it has no value. It's about changing how we think about creating value.
So walk me through that. How do you make money when you're giving stuff away for free?
Think about Google Maps again. They could have charged developers to access those APIs, right?
Right.
But by making them free, they created this huge wave of innovation. All these developers making cool new apps using Google Maps.
Yeah.
And that made Google Maps even more important. It became the platform everyone had to use. So even though they weren't charging for those APIs directly, they were still creating a ton of value.
It's like they built the foundation and said, come on, everyone, build on top of it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's where the real money came in. It's about finding those side door revenue opportunities, those unexpected ways to turn generosity into profit.
But that takes a lot of trust, right? You have to have faith that giving stuff away for free will lead to something bigger.
Jarvis calls it investing in the network.
Yeah.
Understanding that value can be created in ways that don't fit into those old business models. And this leads into another idea, the gift economy.
Okay, so what is the gift economy and how does that relate to this whole free thing?
The gift economy is about voluntary contributions, collaboration,
Yeah.
and this idea that giving is its own reward. Think about open source software like Linux or Apache. Those are essential tools, and they were built by volunteers, not giant companies.
Right, and it's not just about being nice. There's a real business case for this whole collaborative open source approach.
Oh, absolutely. When you tap into that collective intelligence of a group, you get better results, faster innovation, and you can build something truly groundbreaking. It's crowdsourcing, but like on a whole new level.
So how does a company actually go from a traditional model to this gift economy approach? That seems like a pretty big change.
It definitely takes a different way of thinking. Instead of seeing your customers as just people who buy things, you start to see them as partners, as collaborators.
Jarvis talks about Dell's Idea Storm platform as a good example of this.
Yeah, it's this online space where customers can submit ideas for new products and new features. And the important thing is Dell actually listens to those ideas. They've implemented quite a few of them.
So it's not just for show. They're really trying to use the wisdom of the crowd.
Exactly. That's what sets companies like Dell apart. They understand that in the Google economy, their customers are their most valuable asset.
Okay, so we've got the power shifting to the people, the rise of the niche, the power of free, and this idea of the gift economy. So how does Jarvis pull all of this together?
He calls it the Google economy, an economy built on abundance, openness, and connection. It's about using the power of the internet to create value in new and often unexpected ways.
And he keeps saying middlemen are doomed. Is he exaggerating, or is there some truth to that?
I think he's onto something. We've already seen it with travel agents, record stores, even newspapers. The internet is cutting out the middleman in a lot of industries.
And it's not just about technology replacing people. It's a totally different way of connecting with each other and how we access information and services.
Exactly. Think about Amazon. They've basically cut out the traditional bookstore or Netflix. They've changed how we watch movies and TV shows.
So what does this mean for the average person who's not running a tech company or trying to disrupt an industry?
The biggest takeaway, I think, is this. The Google economy is all about being adaptable, being flexible, being okay with change. It's this fluid, dynamic environment that rewards people who are willing to experiment and try new things.
So like the old rules of job security and stability, those are gone.
Yeah, Jarvis uses this metaphor of life is a beta. It's about embracing the idea that we're all constantly learning and evolving, and it's okay to make mistakes.
That's kind of a freeing thought, Like you're not expected to have it all figured out. It's okay to try things and fail and learn from those mistakes.
Exactly. And that's why honesty and transparency are so important. These days, it's almost impossible to hide your mistakes. Information spreads so quickly.
So it's better to just be upfront about it.
I think so. Jarvis argues that transparency can actually make you more believable.
So let's say you're running a business and you mess up. What's the best way to handle it in this new world where everyone expects you to be completely transparent?
Think about JetBlue.
Mm.
A few years back, they had that meltdown where passengers were stuck on the tarmac for hours. It was a PR disaster.
Yeah, I remember that. It was all over the news.
But instead of trying to minimize it or make excuses, JetBlue's CEO came out and apologized publicly. He admitted they messed up and promised to do better.
And people actually respected them more for it.
Exactly. It was a perfect example of how to handle a crisis in the Google economy.
So it's not just about doing the right thing, it's also good business.
Transparency builds trust. And trust is crucial in this new world.
But isn't there a downside to all of this? Like, doesn't this constant push for transparency and efficiency make everything feel a little too impersonal?
That's a valid concern. Jarvis talked about the risk of commodification.
Mm-hmm.
As we rely more and more on platforms like Google, everything can start to feel the same.
Right, like we all become little pieces in this giant machine.
It's something we need to be aware of. How can we enjoy the benefits of the Google economy without losing what makes us unique?
That's a tough question, but it's definitely one we all need to think about. Yeah, so how do we find that balance? How do we enjoy all the good stuff without losing ourselves in the process?
Well, that's the big question, isn't it? And I think part of the answer goes back to something Jarvis talks about a lot.
That whole life is a beta idea.
Exactly. It's like acknowledging that we're all works in progress. You know,
Hmm.
we're learning, we're changing, we're making mistakes, and that's okay,
It's like we need to apply that agile thinking to our own lives, not just our work.
right?
Play flexible.
Be adaptable. Be willing to try new things. Let go of the need to be perfect. Embrace the messiness of it all, you know?
It's kind of scary, but also exciting.
I think so. Because when you let go of that fear of messing up, it opens up so many possibilities. That's where creativity and innovation come from.
So the Google economy isn't just about new technology. It's like a whole new way of thinking.
It's a new way of navigating the world.
Yeah.
And a big part of that is how we think about information. You know, in the past, information was scarce. It was controlled by gatekeepers.
Like publishers,
Didn't
media
even-
companies, big institutions.
Right. But now with the internet, information is everywhere. Anyone can access it.
Which is amazing, but also overwhelming. How do you even make sense of it all?
That's where things like Google search algorithms come in.
Yeah.
They help us filter out the noise and find what we're looking for.
But we have to be careful about becoming too reliant on those algorithms, right? What if they start influencing how we see the world without us even realizing it?
That's a good point. We have to be critical thinkers. We have to question the information we're given and be aware of potential biases.
So it's not just about having information, it's about knowing how to evaluate it, how to think for ourselves.
Exactly. And that's a skill that's becoming more and more important.
Right.
We're constantly being bombarded with information.
It's like we're drowning in content.
Hmm.
Ads, social media, news articles, opinions.
And it's up to each of us to decide what to pay attention to, what to believe, how to form our own opinions.
So the Google economy is kind of a double-edged sword.
I think that's a good way to put it. It gives us incredible access to information and opportunities.
Yeah.
But it also requires us to be more discerning, more critical, more engaged.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into Jarvis's work, what's the one thing you hope our listeners take away from this conversation?
I think the biggest takeaway is this. The internet has changed everything. We're not in the industrial age anymore. We're in the Google age.
So we need to rethink how we work, how we learn, how we interact with each other.
It's about embracing change, trying new things, and most importantly, trusting people.
Because in the end, it's our collective intelligence, our creativity, our willingness to work together that will shape the future of the Google economy.
And that's a future I'm excited to be a part of.
Me too. Well, that was a fascinating deep dive. Thanks for joining me today.
It is my pleasure.